Arc 2, Chapter 1, The First Signs of Autumn. The first sign arrived on a quiet morning. Not through a system notification, not through a traveler, not through some dramatic event. It arrived on the wind. Elias noticed it while opening the front windows of the common hall. The air felt different, cooler, only slightly, yet unmistakably different. Summer warmth still lingered beneath the sunlight, but underneath it rested something else. A subtle crispness, a promise. Autumn was coming. He stood by the window for a long moment, breathing deeply. The valley stretched before him beneath a pale blue sky. Mist curled lazily above the distant fields. The orchard shimmered in the morning light. Everything looked exactly the same. Yet somehow, nothing felt the same. The season was changing. Slowly, patiently. One cool breeze at a time. A familiar blue notification appeared. Seasonal event detected. Summer ending. Autumn approaching. Recommended preparations. Store food supplies. Gather firewood. Insulate guest rooms. Expand pantry. Reward. Seasonal comfort bonus. Elias smiled. For once. The system sounded surprisingly reasonable. No mysterious quests. No legendary monsters. Just common sense. Winter would eventually arrive. And unlike modern life back on Earth, there would be no grocery stores. No online deliveries. No heating systems. Preparation mattered. The realization felt oddly exciting. The inn was no longer simply surviving. It was planning, growing, becoming part of the valley itself. The thought stayed with him throughout breakfast. Fresh bread, apple preserves, hot tea brewed from dried herbs gathered during the summer. The meal tasted wonderful, partly because it was good, partly because the cool morning air made everything taste better. After eating, Elias grabbed a basket and headed toward the orchard. The trees had changed, only slightly. A few leaves now carried hints of gold. Others displayed touches of orange along their edges. The transformation had begun. Sunlight filtered through the branches, creating shifting patterns across the grass below. The orchard felt peaceful, ancient, as though it had witnessed hundreds of autumns before this one. He walked between the rows, inspecting fruit, checking branches, planning. The harvest would be substantial, far larger than he could consume alone. That meant preservation, drying, baking, storing. A pleasant problem to have. One particularly low branch caught his attention. Several apples hung together in a cluster. Their skins glowed deep crimson beneath the morning sun. Perfect. He picked one. The apple felt cool against his palm. Heavy, juicy. A gift from the season. The first bite filled his mouth with sweetness. Honey notes. Floral notes. A slight tartness near the finish. The flavor seemed richer than before, as though the approaching autumn had concentrated everything good inside the fruit. Elias closed his eyes briefly. Even after weeks in this world, moments like this still surprised him. Food simply tasted better here. Or perhaps he finally paid attention. Maybe both. The basket slowly filled. Apples. A few late berries, discovered near the edge of the orchard. Several handfuls of wild herbs. Nothing rushed. Nothing forced. The morning unfolded at its own pace. Back at the inn, the kitchen greeted him with familiar warmth. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The scent of old bread lingered faintly in the air. Copper pots hung neatly above the work table. Everything waited. Ready. Today would be his first attempt at making preserves. The idea felt appropriately autumnal, a way of capturing summer before it disappeared. He washed the apples carefully. Each one gleamed beneath the water. Rich, and colors worthy of a painting. Soon the kitchen filled with neatly sliced fruit. Bowls overflowed with apple wedges. Honey waited nearby, alongside cinnamon-like bark acquired from a traveling merchant several days earlier. Not exactly cinnamon, but close enough. The aroma alone promised comfort. The cooking began slowly. Apples entered a large pot. Honey followed. A splash of water. Then the fragrant bark. As heat built beneath the pot, the kitchen transformed. The apples softened gradually, breaking down into golden pieces. Steam rose toward the ceiling. Sweet aromas spread throughout the room. The scent reminded Elias of holidays, of bakeries, of cozy evenings beneath blankets. The honey deepened as it warmed, creating rich caramel notes. The spice added warmth, complexity. The entire kitchen smelled incredible. By noon, the preserves had become thick and glossy, amber-colored, beautiful. Sunlight shining through the jar made it glow like liquid gold. A notification appeared. New recipe learned. Autumn orchard preserves. Quality. Excellent. Comfort value. High. Elias laughed softly. The system clearly appreciated good food. Then again, so did he. Several jars soon lined the kitchen shelves. Tiny treasures. Stored sunshine. Stored summer. Stored comfort. The sight filled him with satisfaction. This was exactly what preparation should feel like. Not fear. Not panic. The afternoon brought another project. Firewood. The inn's restored fireplace had become one of its greatest strengths, but fireplaces consumed wood surprisingly quickly, especially during cold weather. A small woodshed stood behind the orchard, half empty. That would not do. For the next few hours, Elias gathered fallen branches from the forest edge. Nothing dramatic, nothing dangerous, just steady work beneath tall trees. Sunlight filtered through leaves overhead. Birds called from distant branches. The scent of pine filled the air. Piece by piece, the woodpile grew, a little larger, a little more reassuring. By evening, the shed looked noticeably fuller, not complete, but improved. Enough for now. The valley glowed golden beneath the setting sun as Elias returned to the inn. His arms felt pleasantly tired, the kind of tiredness earned through useful work. Inside, he prepared dinner, thick slices of bread, fresh butter, vegetable soup, and a spoonful of the new apple preserves spread across warm toast. The preserves melted slightly into the bread, creating a glossy layer of amber sweetness. The first bite nearly made him stop chewing. Sweet, rich, comforting. The flavor tasted like autumn itself. If autumn could be spread on toast. Dinner disappeared surprisingly quickly. Outside, darkness slowly settled across the hills. The lanterns along the porch glowed warmly. Fireflies drifted among the fields, though fewer than before. Even they seemed aware of the changing season. Elias carried a mug of hot tea outside, then settled into his favorite chair. The inn stood quietly behind him. Warm windows, soft lantern light, the distant crackle of the hearth. The Firefly Lantern Inn had survived its first weeks. Now, it prepared for something new. Not bigger, not grander, simply different. A new season. A new chapter. The valley stretched beneath the stars, patient as ever, and somewhere, beyond the hills, autumn was already on its way. Arc 2, Chapter 2, The Pantry Room. The next morning arrived wrapped in fog, not the thin mist that sometimes drifted through the valley at sunrise. This was thicker, softer, a blanket of pale silver covering the hills, beyond the inn. From the porch, Elias could barely see the first row of orchard trees. Everything farther away had disappeared. The world seemed smaller today, quieter, more intimate. He stood outside with a mug of hot tea warming his hands. The tea carried a gentle herbal aroma, something between mint and wildflowers, a combination he had discovered entirely by accident. One of the best discoveries usually happened that way. The valley felt different in autumn. Summer had been bright, energetic. Autumn seemed content to whisper. The wind moved more carefully. The sunlight lingered lower in the sky. Even the birds sounded calmer. A small notification appeared. Seasonal preparation reminder. Food storage capacity 38. Recommended goal 75. Elias nodded. That seemed reasonable. Over the past few days he had filled several shelves with apple preserves, dried herbs, extra flour, honey, barley. Yet the system clearly believed more preparation was necessary, which raised an important question. Where exactly would he store everything? The kitchen shelves were already becoming crowded. Jars occupied nearly every available space. Baskets sat beneath tables. Sacks leaned against walls. The inn needed additional storage, a proper pantry. The realization followed him inside. He moved slowly through the building, examining rooms, considering possibilities. Most of the ground floor had already found a purpose. The common hall, kitchen, guest room, storage closet. Then he discovered a narrow door tucked beneath the staircase, a door he had somehow ignored for weeks. Dust covered the handle. Cobwebs hung from the frame. Interesting. Very interesting. Curiosity immediately won. The door opened with a reluctant creak. Cool air drifted outward. The room beyond was surprisingly large. Not huge, but larger than expected. Stone walls surrounded the space. No windows. A low ceiling, crossed by wooden beams. Most importantly, it remained cool, even during the warmer parts of the day. Elias smiled. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. A pantry, or at least it would become one. The room clearly hadn't been used for years. Dust coated every surface. Old shelves sagged beneath neglect. Several empty barrels rested in one corner. Yet beneath all of that lay potential. The best kind of discovery. A notification appeared. New area discovered. Storage cellar. Current condition. Neglected. Potential use. Pantry. Reward available upon restoration. Looks like we found today's project. The system seemed pleased. So was he. The next several hours passed in comfortable productivity. The first step was cleaning. Naturally, everything began with cleaning. The cellar surrendered. Years of dust surprisingly slowly. Sweeping revealed forgotten corners. Brushing removed cobwebs. Sunlight from the open doorway illuminated clouds of floating dust. Not glamorous work, but satisfying. Each cleaned section revealed progress. Each cleared shelf made the room feel more useful. By midday, the cellar already looked transformed. Not finished, just improved. The difference mattered. It always did. Eventually, hunger interrupted his efforts. The timing felt appropriate. No pantry project should continue without lunch. The kitchen welcomed him with familiar warmth. Autumn sunlight poured through the windows. Outside, the fog had finally lifted. Golden leaves shimmered among the orchard branches. The sight inspired today's meal. Apples. Again. Fortunately, apples remained wonderfully versatile. Today, he decided on something different. Warm apple skillet cakes. Simple. Rustic. Comforting. Exactly the sort of thing that belonged in a countryside inn. The batter came together easily. Flour. Eggs. Milk. A touch of honey. Nothing complicated. Meanwhile, several apples were sliced thinly. Their skins glowed ruby red against the cutting board. The slices entered a hot skillet with butter. Immediately the kitchen filled with aroma. Sweet apples. Rich butter. Hints of caramel. The scent spread through the inn like a promise. As the apples softened, the batter followed. A gentle sizzle filled the room. Steam rose toward the ceiling. The edges slowly turned golden. Then deeper gold, then amber. By the time the cakes finished cooking, the kitchen smelled incredible. Elias transferred them to a plate. A drizzle of honey completed the dish. The first bite nearly justified abandoning all future recipes and simply making these forever. The edges were crisp, the center soft. Sweet apples balanced perfectly against rich butter. The honey tied everything together. Comfort food in its purest form. Lunch disappeared quickly. Perhaps too quickly. A second serving followed shortly afterward, strictly for quality control. Obviously, refreshed and well-fed. Elias returned to the cellar. The afternoon became dedicated to organization. Shelves were repaired. Barrels cleaned. Storage areas planned carefully. One section for preserves. Another for grains. Another for dried herbs. A place for future harvests. The process felt surprisingly rewarding. Not because it was exciting, because it represented preparation, stability. The inn was no longer operating day to day. It was beginning to think ahead, like a real home, like a real business. By late afternoon, Jars of preserves lined the shelves. Amber apples glowed behind glass. Bundles of dried herbs hung neatly from beams. Flour occupied sturdy containers. Everything had a place. Everything belonged. The transformation felt remarkable. A room forgotten for years now served a purpose once more. The small notification appeared. Storage cellar restored. Food storage capacity 72. Comfort 1. Preparedness 3. Elias grinned. Preparedness. A new statistic that seemed useful. The system continued surprising him, not with dramatic powers, with practical ones. As evening approached, he lit the lanterns outside. Golden light spilled across the porch. Inside, the fireplace crackled softly. Dinner remained simple. Fresh bread, vegetable stew, apple preserves spread generously across thick slices of toast. The preserves had somehow improved overnight. The flavors deepened. The sweetness mellowed. The spice became richer. Autumn in a jar. Afterward, he carried a mug of tea onto the porch. The valley stretched before him beneath a sky painted gold and copper. The orchard glowed with autumn colors. Leaves rustled softly in the evening breeze. A few drifted lazily to the ground. The first leaves of the season. All ordinary, yet somehow significant. Autumn had truly arrived. Behind him, the firefly lantern stood warm and welcoming. The pantry was stocked. The hearth was ready. The lanterns glowed. The guest room waited patiently for travelers. Piece by piece, the inn was becoming exactly what it needed to be. Not grand, not famous, reliable, comfortable, prepared. And as the first stars appeared above the valley, Elias found himself looking forward to whatever the season might bring next. Arc 2, Chapter 3, The Taste of Autumn. A week passed. Not quickly, not slowly. The sort of week measured by loaves of bread, baskets of apples, and cups of tea enjoyed on the porch. The sort of week Elias had grown to appreciate. Each morning brought cool air. Each evening arrived a little earlier than the one before. The valley was changing. Autumn had settled in properly now. Golden leaves decorated the orchard. The hills beyond the inn carried streaks of amber and copper. Even the sunlight seemed softer, less intense, warmer somehow, like a blanket instead of a spotlight. The firefly lantern inn had changed as well. The restored pantry beneath the stairs was nearly full. Jars of preserves lined the shelves. Bundles of herbs hung neatly from ceiling beams. Barrels contained flour, barley, and dried apples. Every time Elias opened the pantry door, he felt a small surge of satisfaction. Preparedness had a comforting beauty all its own. This particular morning began with rain. Gentle rain, the kind that tapped softly against windows rather than hammering against rooftops. Elias woke to the sound, lay in bed for a moment, and listened. The rhythm was soothing. Rain on wood, rain on stone, rain on leaves. A quiet orchestra performed by the weather itself. Outside, the valley disappeared behind silver curtains. The orchard looked blurry through the mist-covered glass. Drops of water clung to every branch, every leaf, every blade of grass. The world seemed freshly washed. The inn felt especially cozy on days like this. The fireplace crackled. The kitchen stayed warm. The lanterns glowed softly, despite the morning hour. Rainy days encouraged comfort, and comfort encouraged cooking. Naturally, by the time breakfast finished, Elias already had a new idea. Something seasonal, something that belonged to autumn, something guests might remember. The thought followed him into the pantry. He studied the shelves. Apples, honey, flour, barley, herbs, dried berries, plenty of ingredients. The answer arrived when his eyes settled on a basket of recently harvested apples. Apple pastries, not pie, not cake. Something simpler, rustic, the kind of treat a traveler might enjoy beside a fireplace after a long day on the road. A hand pie, small enough to hold, large enough to satisfy. Perfect. The project immediately improved his mood. Rain continued outside while the kitchen slowly came alive. Flour dusted the work table. Butter chilled in a bowl. Apples waited nearby. The familiar rhythm of preparation began. First came the dough. Flour mixed with butter. Pinches of salt. Cold water. Simple ingredients becoming something greater. His fingers worked carefully, breaking butter into tiny pieces, creating layers, creating texture. The dough came together slowly, patiently, as good dough always did. After resting it beneath a cloth, he turned his attention to the filling. Apples were peeled, then sliced. Thin crescents accumulated on the cutting board. Their scent filled the air. Fresh, sweet, bright. Into a skillet they went, alongside honey, a splash of water, and a small piece of fragrant bark similar to cinnamon. Soon the kitchen smelled extraordinary. The apples softened gradually. Honey thickened. Steam curled upward. Warm aromas drifted through every corner of the inn. The smell alone felt like autumn, like warm scarves, like fireplaces, like evenings spent indoors while rain tapped gently outside. By midday, the filling had cooled. The dough was ready, and Elias began assembling the pastries. Small circles of dough, spoonfuls of apple filling, folded carefully, sealed along the edges. Each pie looked slightly different, not perfect, identical, and made, which somehow made them more appealing. The tray entered the oven, and then came the waiting. The best part, the most difficult part. The smell emerged first. Rich butter, baking pastry, warm apples, caramelized honey. The scent spread throughout the inn with remarkable efficiency. Even Elias found himself becoming hungry again. Despite having eaten breakfast only a few hours earlier, the oven transformed simple ingredients into temptation. When the pastries finally emerged, they looked beautiful, golden brown, flaky. Steam escaping through tiny vents cut into the crust, the sort of food that begged to be eaten immediately despite being far too hot. Elias managed to wait almost 3 full minutes, a personal achievement. The first bite rewarded his patience. The crust shattered delicately. Flaky layers melted on his tongue. The filling remained warm and fragrant. Sweet apples, rich honey, gentle spice, comfort in edible form. He nodded to himself. This recipe would stay, definitely stay. A notification appeared. New signature recipe created. Autumn apple hand pie. Quality, excellent. Comfort rating, high. Potential guest favorite. That's encouraging. He took another bite, purely for research purposes. Of course, the rain continued all afternoon. Steady, peaceful. The sort of weather that encouraged people to stay indoors. So Elias spent the next several hours performing smaller tasks around the inn. He polished lantern glass, organized kitchen shelves, mended a loose chair leg, rotated pantry stock. Nothing exciting, yet strangely satisfying. The Firefly lantern inn thrived on little improvements, each one barely noticeable on its own. Together, they changed everything. Late in the afternoon, another surprise arrived. A knock. 3 soft taps against the front door. Elias blinked. Visitors had become more common recently, still uncommon enough to remain exciting. He opened the door. A young woman stood outside beneath a rain cloak. Water dripped from the edges of her hood. A travel pack rested on her shoulders. She looked exhausted, the sort of exhaustion created by long roads and bad weather. Yet when warm air from the inn drifted outside, her expression visibly softened. Her shoulders relaxed. Thank goodness. Those 4 words told him everything he needed to know. Come in. She stepped inside immediately. The door closed behind her. Rain remained outside. Warmth remained inside. The contrast was dramatic. The traveler stood quietly for a moment, taking everything in. The fire, the lanterns, the scent of fresh pastries, the polished wood, the comfortable silence. A smile appeared, small at first, then genuine. This place feels wonderful. Elias found himself smiling too. The compliment never got old. Not because it praised the building, because it validated the effort behind it. Every swept floor, every loaf of bread, every flower, every lantern. They mattered. The traveler introduced herself as Clara, a map-maker journeying between villages, not an adventurer, not a merchant, a cartographer, someone who spent her days exploring roads and recording them carefully onto parchment. The profession fascinated Elias immediately. They talked while he prepared dinner, simple vegetable stew, fresh bread. Naturally, one of the new apple hand pies. Clara's reaction to the pastry alone justified the entire recipe. She closed her eyes after the first bite, then immediately took a second, then a third. Eventually she pointed at the pastry. Whatever this is. She paused. Don't stop making it. Elias laughed. I'll take that as a compliment. You should. Evening settled around the inn. Rain continued softly beyond the windows. Firelight flickered across the common hall. The atmosphere felt impossibly cozy. At one point Clara leaned back in her chair, listening to the rain, watching the fire, holding a cup of tea between both hands. Then, she sighed contentedly. Some places help people travel. Her gaze drifted toward the windows. And some places help people rest. The words lingered, much like Harold's had, much like Marta's. Different people, different journeys. Yet they all seemed to notice the same thing. The inn wasn't special because of magic, or luxury, or adventure. It was special because it offered rest, real rest, the kind people rarely found elsewhere. Later that night, after Clara retired to the guest room upstairs, Elias stepped onto the porch. Rain still fell, gentle and steady. Lantern light reflected from wet wooden boards. The orchard shimmered beneath the storm. The valley slept peacefully. A final notification appeared. Guest satisfaction recorded. Clara the cartographer. Comfort rating. Excellent. Favorite item. Autumn apple hand pie. In reputation increased. Elias smiled. The notification faded. The rain continued. And somewhere inside the inn, the traveler slept soundly beneath clean sheets, while autumn settled quietly over the valley. Exactly as it should. Arc 2, Chapter 4. A map of quiet places. The rain continued through the night. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a steady whisper against the roof of the Firefly Lantern Inn. When Elias woke the next morning, the world beyond the windows looked washed clean. Every leaf in the orchard gleamed. Every blade of grass sparkled beneath droplets of water. The valley seemed brighter, somehow, as though the rain had polished the landscape while everyone slept. Downstairs, the inn remained quiet. The fireplace had faded to glowing embers. The common hall smelled faintly of wood smoke, fresh bread, and yesterday's apple hand pies. A comforting combination, one worth remembering. Elias added a few logs to the hearth. Soon flames returned. Range light danced across the stone. The room immediately felt warmer, friendlier, more awake. A few minutes later, soft footsteps descended the stairs. Clara appeared. Her travel clothes had dried overnight. Her hair was neatly tied back. Most importantly, she looked rested. Rested. Warning. Warning. She glanced toward the fire, then toward the kitchen, then toward the table, where a fresh loaf of bread was cooling. A smile appeared. I think I chose the right inn. Elias laughed. I hope so. Breakfast was simple. Warm bread, butter, apple preserves, herbal tea. Yet Clara seemed to enjoy every bite. Travelers often did. Long roads had a way of making simple meals taste extraordinary. After breakfast, she unrolled several maps across one of the larger tables. Immediately, the common hall transformed into a workshop. Parchment covered the surface. Lines crossed hills. Roads wound between forests. Small symbols marked villages, bridges, and rivers. Elias couldn't help staring. The maps were beautiful. Not merely useful. Beautiful. Each line carried intention. Each note reflected countless hours of travel. Clara noticed his curiosity. Want to see something interesting? Always. She pointed toward a section of parchment. This valley. Elias leaned closer. Sure enough, the valley surrounding the inn appeared there. The orchard. The nearby stream, the winding road, even the forest edge, everything had been carefully recorded. Then he noticed something missing. The inn. There was no inn, no marker, no building, nothing. Clara followed his gaze. That's because this map is 2 years old. Ah, at least. I assume that's why. Elias smiled. The explanation was easier than describing his strange arrival in this world. For several minutes they studied the map together. Clara explained how she surveyed roads, measured distances, recorded landmarks. The process fascinated him. Back on Earth, maps appeared instantly on phones. People rarely thought about the work behind them. Here, every map represented countless footsteps, countless observations, countless hours. The realization gave him new appreciation for the profession. Eventually Clara reached into her satchel and removed a charcoal pencil. Then she looked at him. Mind if I add something? Elias Link. The inn. The inn. For some reason, the idea felt surprisingly important. He nodded. Clara smiled, then carefully marked a small symbol beside the road. A tiny building. Simple, unremarkable, yet somehow meaningful. Next to it she wrote, Firefly Lantern Inn. The letters looked elegant upon the parchment. Permanent. Real. For several moments, Elias simply stared. The inn now existed on a map. A small thing, yet not a small thing at all. A notification appeared. Local landmark recorded. Firefly Lantern Inn. Visibility increased. Future travelers may discover your location. Reputation 1. That's going to take some getting used to. Clara laughed. What is being a destination? The morning passed pleasantly afterward. Rain clouds gradually drifted away. Sunlight returned. The valley emerged once more beneath blue skies. Outside, everything shimmered with freshness. The orchard looked particularly beautiful. Golden leaves glowed against the sunlight. Drops of water clung to branches like tiny crystals. The sight inspired another project. Naturally, autumn seemed determined to provide endless excuses for cooking. Today, however, Elias wanted something different. Soup. Not ordinary vegetable soup. Something richer. Something worthy of a cool autumn afternoon. After exploring the pantry, inspiration struck. Barley, carrots, beans, herbs. A few mushrooms gathered near the forest several days earlier. Perfect. The preparation began slowly. Onions first, thinly sliced, into a heavy pot, with butter. A familiar sizzle filled the kitchen. Soon sweet aromas emerged. Then carrots. Then mushrooms. Everything softened gradually, patiently, the way good soup demanded. Barley followed, along with water and herbs. The pot simmered gently atop the stove. Tiny bubbles rose lazily to the surface. Steam curled upward. The smell spread throughout the inn. Earthy, warm, comforting. Outside, cool autumn air drifted through open windows. Inside, the kitchen felt wonderfully cozy. The contrast made the soup smell even better. By lunchtime, the broth had deepened beautifully. The barley became tender. The vegetables practically melted. The entire dish radiated warmth. Elias served 2 bowls, one for himself, one for Clara, alongside thick slices of fresh bread. Of course, an apple hand pie for dessert. The meal disappeared remarkably quickly. At one point, Clara paused halfway through her soup. This tastes like a rainy day. Elias blinked, then laughed. I'm not entirely sure what that means. It means it's good. Fair enough. The afternoon slipped by in peaceful conversation. Travel stories. Roads. Villages. Interesting landmarks. Nothing dramatic. No monsters. No epic quests. Just ordinary life. Exactly the sort of stories Elias enjoyed most. As the sun began its descent, Clara prepared to leave. Her maps were rolled carefully, the satchel packed, her route planned. Yet before departing, she handed him a small folded piece of parchment. What's this? A copy. A copy of what? She smiled. The section with your inn. Elias unfolded it. There it was. A small piece of the valley, a small road, and a tiny marker labeled Firefly Lantern Inn. Something about it made him unexpectedly happy. Perhaps because it felt real, tangible, proof that the inn existed beyond its walls, beyond the valley, beyond himself. Clara climbed onto her horse shortly afterward. The animal shifted impatiently, ready for the road. Before leaving, she looked back one final time. You know what? I think people are going to start talking about this place. Elias glanced toward the inn. The lanterns, the orchard, the warm windows. Maybe. Clara shook her head. She smiled. Definitely. Then she rode away. The sound of hoofbeats gradually faded into the distance. Silence returned. Comfortable silence. The best kind. That evening, Elias sat on the porch with a mug of tea. The copied map rested on the table beside him. The lanterns glowed warmly. The orchard rustled softly. The stars slowly appeared one by one. For the first time, he found himself wondering not whether travelers would come, but who would come next. And somehow, that felt like progress. A very cozy kind of progress. Arc 2, Chapter 5, The Orchard Harvest. The next morning arrived beneath a sky the color of pale silver. Thin clouds drifted lazily across the valley. Not enough to threaten rain, just enough to soften the sunlight. Autumn had fully settled over the hills, now. The orchard behind the inn glowed with shades of gold, crimson, and amber. Every tree seemed richer than before, as though the season itself had taken a brush and painted each leaf by hand. Elias noticed it the moment he stepped onto the porch. The cool breeze greeted him, carrying the scent of damp earth, fallen leaves, ripening fruit, the smell of autumn. He wrapped both hands around a mug of hot tea and stood quietly for several minutes. The valley remained peaceful. A thin layer of mist lingered above the distant stream. Birds called occasionally from the trees. Somewhere nearby, a squirrel scolded the entire world for reasons known only to squirrels. The inn behind him creaked softly, comfortably, like an old cat stretching after a nap. A familiar blue notification appeared. Seasonal task available. Orchard harvest. Current ripeness. Excellent. Recommendation. Gather apples before heavy frost. Reward. Food supplies. Comfort materials. Potential new recipes. Elias nodded. That seemed sensible. The apples had never looked better. Many branches bent beneath their weight. The orchard had provided generously all season. Now, it was time to return the favor by making proper use of the harvest. After breakfast, he grabbed several baskets and headed outside. The day could not have been more perfect for harvesting. The air remained cool, but comfortable. Sunlight filtered through golden leaves. Occasional breezes sent small flurries of color drifting through the orchard. Leaves spun slowly toward the ground like tiny dancers. Scene felt almost magical, not because of enchantment, because of beauty. The first basket filled quickly. The apples practically seemed eager to be picked. Red ones, golden ones, several with streaks of both colors. Each fruit carried a slight chill from the morning air. Their skins shone brightly beneath the sunlight. Some were nearly perfect. Others carried tiny blemishes. All of them smelled wonderful, sweet, fresh, alive. Elias moved slowly between the rows. No rush. Harvesting felt less like work and more like conversation. A quiet exchange between gardener and orchard. The trees had spent months growing fruit. Now, he collected the results. One basket became two. Two became three. Soon a small mountain of apples accumulated near the inn. Far more than he could possibly eat fresh, which meant preserving, drying, cooking, experimenting. Exactly the sort of challenge he enjoyed. By midday, he finally stopped for lunch. Not because the harvest was finished, because hunger had become impossible to ignore. The kitchen welcomed him with familiar warmth. Sunlight streamed through the windows. The scent of old bread lingered softly in the air. Everything felt inviting, comfortable, home. Today called for something hearty. Harvest days deserved proper meals. He started with onions, then carrots, a handful of mushrooms, all diced carefully and added to a heavy pot with butter. The familiar sizzling sound filled the room. Soon rich aromas followed: sweet onions, earthy mushrooms, warm herbs. The sort of smell that made an empty stomach immediately impatient. Barley joined the pot shortly afterward. Then water, then thyme. Good soup required patience. Fortunately, patience was one ingredient Elias always had in abundance these days. While the soup simmered, he prepared fresh bread. The process had become second nature. Weird. Foul. Wheat. The dough responded beautifully, soft beneath his hands, elastic and alive. Every loaf felt slightly different, yet somehow familiar, like greeting an old friend. By the time lunch was ready, the soup had become thick and comforting, the barley tender, the vegetables soft, the broth rich and fragrant. Combined with warm bread, the meal tasted exactly right for a cool autumn afternoon. Simple, honest, satisfying. Afterward, Elias returned to the orchard. The afternoon sun hung lower now. Golden light washed across the valley. Everything seemed painted in warm colors. The harvest continued. Basket after basket, tree after tree. Eventually, only a handful of apples remained on the branches. Enough for birds, enough for wildlife, enough to leave the orchard feeling generous rather than stripped bare. The final basket felt strangely satisfying. Not because the work was over, because the season had reached a milestone. The orchard had done its job, and done it well. Back inside, the real challenge began. Processing the harvest. Apples covered nearly every available surface. Counters, tables, shelves. The sight would have overwhelmed him months ago. Now it simply looked like opportunity. He began with drying. Thin slices were arranged carefully across drying racks, rows upon rows of apples, each one catching the warm afternoon light. The slices resembled tiny stained glass windows, gold and ruby and amber. Beautiful enough to display, tasty enough to disappear quickly. Next came preserves. Large pots returned to the stove. Apples simmered alongside honey. Steam filled the kitchen. The scent became almost unbelievable. Sweet fruit, caramelized sugar, warm spice. The aroma drifted throughout the inn, then into the hallway, then upstairs. By evening, the entire building smelled like an autumn bakery. Not a bad outcome, not at all. As twilight approached, another idea arrived. Apple butter. The name sounded simple. The process was less so. Apples cooked slowly for hours, breaking down gradually, concentrating flavor, deepening sweetness. The mixture darkened from gold to amber, then from amber to rich bronze. The transformation fascinated him. The final result spread smoothly across bread. Silky, rich, incredibly flavorful. The first taste nearly stopped him in his tracks. Sweet apples, honey, hints of spice. A deep caramel note developed during the long cooking process. Autumn captured in a spoon. A notification appeared. New recipe learned. Orchard apple butter. Quality, excellent. Comfort value, very high. Potential seasonal favorite. Elias grinned. The system clearly approved. So did he. The rest of the evening passed peacefully. Jars cooled on shelves. Drying apples rested on racks. The pantry gained several new rows of preserves. Each shelf looked increasingly impressive, increasingly prepared. Winter no longer seemed distant. It felt manageable. The inn would be ready. That realization brought a quiet sense of satisfaction. Later, after cleaning the kitchen, Elias carried a plate of fresh bread and apple butter onto the porch. The lanterns glowed warmly around him. The valley stretched beneath a sky filled with stars. A few leaves drifted across the yard in the evening breeze. The orchard stood dark and peaceful beyond the lantern light. Harvested, resting, its work completed for the year. Elias spread apple butter onto a slice of warm bread. The aroma alone made him smile. The first bite tasted even better. Rich, sweet, comforting. The sort of food that encouraged slow evenings and warm conversations. The sort of food travelers would remember. As he sat there beneath the stars, the inn glowed softly behind him. The pantry was fuller than ever. The orchard harvest was secure. The lanterns welcomed the night. And for the first time since autumn began, Elias felt truly prepared for whatever the season might bring next. The valley settled into silence. The good kind. The peaceful kind. The kind that made a person want to stay just a little longer before going inside. So he did. Arc 2, Chapter 6, The Traveling Shepherd. The morning after the harvest dawned, bright and cold. Not winter cold. Not yet. But the kind of autumn chill that made warm bread seem more appealing and fireplaces feel increasingly important. When Elias stepped onto the porch, his breath briefly appeared in the air. A faint cloud. Gone almost immediately. Still, it was the first time he'd seen it since arriving in this world. Autumn was deepening. The orchard behind the inn stood quiet now. Most of the apples had been harvested. The branches seemed lighter, relieved somehow. Golden leaves drifted lazily through the cool morning breeze. A few landed on the porch. Others settled among the grass. The valley looked beautiful and slightly sleepy. Elias wrapped both hands around a mug of hot apple tea. The tea had become a daily ritual, partly because he enjoyed it, partly because there were an astonishing number of apples available. He stood quietly for several minutes, watching sunlight slowly spill across the hills, listening to distant birds, enjoying the calm. Then a notification appeared. Season progress updated. Autumn early mid-season. Preparedness good. Comfort rating rising. Recommended focus. Guest services. Guest services. Interesting. The pantry was nearly full. Firewood supplies continued growing steadily. The guest room remained cozy. Perhaps the system was right. The inn itself needed attention now. Or perhaps more accurately, future guests needed attention. The thought lingered as he headed inside. The common hall greeted him warmly. The fireplace crackled softly. Fresh bread rested beneath a cloth on the kitchen counter. The scent of apple butter still lingered from yesterday's work. Everything felt comfortable, established. The inn was beginning to develop routines, and Elias found that strangely satisfying. The morning passed peacefully. He polished lantern glass, rotated pantry stock, checked the guest room flowers. The flowers had begun to wilt. Not surprising. Nothing lasted forever. He replaced them with fresh autumn blooms collected near the stream. Golden flowers. Small red blossoms. A few branches carrying colorful leaves. The room immediately looked alive again. Another small improvement. Another tiny layer of comfort. By midday, sunlight filled the common hall. The weather remained cool, but pleasant. Perfect travel weather, which perhaps explained why Elias noticed movement on the distant road. A traveler. Several travelers. He narrowed his eyes. Not travelers. Animals. Sheep. A flock. The realization arrived moments before the sound. Soft bleating drifted across the valley. Then came the shepherd, a man perhaps 40 years old, weathered face, heavy wool cloak, walking staff in one hand, a sheepdog trotting faithfully beside him. The flock moved around him like a living cloud, white wool glowing beneath the afternoon sunlight. The sight looked almost picturesque, like something painted on the cover of a storybook. As the shepherd approached the inn, the dog noticed Elias first. Its tail immediately began wagging, an encouraging sign. Elias trusted friendly dogs. The shepherd raised a hand. Afternoon. Afternoon. The man glanced toward the inn, then toward the lanterns, then toward the chimney. His expression brightened slightly. You serve meals. Elias smiled. That's generally the plan. The shepherd laughed. Oh. He looked over his shoulder. My flock, and I have been walking since dawn. The sheep immediately began grazing nearby as though they had received official permission from the valley itself. The dog flopped onto the grass, clearly experienced in the art of resting. A notification appeared. New visitor arrive. Guest type. Traveling shepherd. Opportunity. Warm meal. Rest stop. Hospitality. The shepherd introduced himself as Rowan. Every autumn he moved livestock between seasonal grazing grounds, a journey requiring several weeks. Apparently, a deep appreciation for hot food. Within minutes, Rowan occupied a table near the fireplace. The sheep remained outside. The dog eventually wandered inside after receiving permission, then immediately claimed the warmest spot near the hearth. A professional decision. Elias respected it. Lunch required something hearty, something suitable for a shepherd spending long days outdoors. Fortunately, the pantry was well stocked. He decided on thick barley stew, fresh bread, and roasted root vegetables glazed lightly with honey. Comfort food, the very best kind. The stew began with onions, then carrots, then mushrooms. Everything cooked slowly in butter until fragrant. Barley followed, alongside herbs gathered throughout summer. The kitchen filled with aroma, rich, earthy, warm, the sort of smell capable of making people hungry even when they weren't. Fresh bread joined the meal. Its crust crackled beautifully after leaving the oven. Steam escaped when sliced. Butter melted instantly across the warm surface. Finally came the vegetables. Carrots, turnips, a few small potatoes, roasted until golden, finished with honey. The edges caramelized beautifully. When the meal reached the table, Rowan simply stared for several seconds, then looked at Elias, then back at the food. This looks far too good for a roadside stop. I'll choose to take that as a compliment. You should. The shepherd immediately dug in. The several minutes conversation disappeared entirely. Only the sounds of eating remained. The best possible review. Even the dog received a small bowl of stew broth and scraps of bread. Its tail thumped happily against the floor. Guest satisfaction appeared universal. Eventually Rowan leaned back in his chair. A content sigh escaped him. The sort of sigh that could only be earned, not fake. That's the best meal I've had in weeks. Elias smiled. Travelers seemed to say things like that surprisingly often, yet each time felt genuine. Outside, the sheep continued grazing peacefully. Inside, the common hall remained warm and comfortable. Rain threatened on the horizon. Dark clouds gathered beyond distant hills. Contrast made the inn feel even cozier. As afternoon faded toward evening, Rowan decided to stay overnight. The decision pleased Elias more than he expected, not because of the payment, because it meant the inn was becoming useful. People were choosing it, trusting it, returning comfort for comfort. Before dinner, Rowan shared stories from the road, villages, mountain passes, weather forecasts, seasonal traditions. One story involved a sheep escaping into a bakery. The sheep apparently consumed an entire tray of pastries before being caught. The dog seemed particularly interested in that story, possibly because it already knew it. Dinner arrived shortly afterward. Simpler than lunch. Vegetable soup, fresh bread, apple butter, and warm baked apples. The meal disappeared almost as quickly as the previous one. Outside, rain finally began falling. Gentle at first, then steadily. The sound against the windows transformed the atmosphere instantly. Firelight flickered. Lanterns glowed. Rain tapped softly against the glass. The inn felt like a refuge, a small island of warmth in a cool autumn night. Rowan seemed to feel it too. At one point he simply sat beside the fireplace, watching the flames, listening to the rain, the dog asleep at his feet. Then he smiled. You know what this place reminds me of? What? The inns the Fa used to visit as a child. Elias looked up. The shepherd continued. The kind where people remembered your name. The statement lingered. Quiet, meaningful, comfortable, much like the inn itself. Later that evening, after Rowan retired upstairs and the sheep settled safely near a covered pasture beside the orchard, Elias stepped onto the porch. Rain continued softly. The lanterns reflected on wet wood. The valley beyond had vanished into darkness. A final notification appeared. Best satisfaction, excellent. Rowan the shepherd. Favorite features: warm meals, fireplace, quiet atmosphere, comfort 3, reputation 1. Elias smiled. The inn was growing. Not quickly, but dramatically. One traveler at a time. One meal at a time. One warm evening at a time. And somehow, that felt exactly right. Behind him, the firefly lantern inn glowed warmly against the rainy autumn night. Ahead, the valley slept beneath falling rain. And somewhere upstairs, a shepherd rested peacefully while his loyal dog dreamed beside the fire. Another good day. Another small story added to the inn's growing history. Arc 2, Chapter 7: Cinnamon and Rain. The rain was still falling when Elias woke. Soft, steady, patient. The kind of rain that seemed content to remain for hours without ever becoming a storm. It drummed gently against the roof, tapped against the windows, whispered through the orchard beyond the inn. For a few moments, he remained beneath the blankets, listening. The firefly lantern inn felt especially cozy on mornings like this. The building seemed to pull warmth inward. The fireplace downstairs, the thick wooden walls, the scent of yesterday's bread lingering faintly in the air. Everything encouraged staying inside. Everything encouraged slowing down. Eventually, however, responsibility won. The inn would not run itself. Unfortunately, Elias dressed and headed downstairs. The common hall greeted him with soft amber light. One lantern still burned near the entrance. The fireplace had faded to glowing embers overnight. A faint scent of wood smoke drifted through the room. Near the hearth, Rowan's sheepdog was already awake. The dog raised its head, observed Elias, then wagged its tail once, a formal greeting, after which it immediately went back to resting, clearly satisfied that nothing dramatic had happened during the night. A few moments later, Rowan appeared at the top of the stairs. The shepherd looked rested, comfortably rested, the sort of rested that only happened after a warm bed and a quiet night. Warning, warning. The shepherd glanced toward the windows. Rain streaked the glass. Looks like we're staying another day. Elias followed his gaze. The road outside had become muddy. The hills beyond were wrapped in mist. Traveling today would be unpleasant. At best, you're welcome to. Rowan smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. A notification appeared. Extended stay confirmed. Guest comfort bonus available. Opportunity. Special meal. Elias laughed softly. The system really did believe most problems could be solved with food. To be fair, it often wasn't wrong. Breakfast became a leisurely affair. Fresh bread, butter, apple preserves, warm tea, nothing complicated. The sort of meal that suited rainy weather. Rowan ate near the fireplace, while the dog occupied its now official spot by the hearth. Outside, sheep grazed beneath a covered shelter near the orchard. Fontaine, gray, completely unconcerned by the weather. The inn settled into a pleasant rhythm. Firelight, conversation, silence. The balance felt perfect. After breakfast, Rowan wandered outside to check on his flock. Meanwhile, Elias turned his attention toward the pantry. The shelves were beginning to look impressive. Rows of preserves, dried herbs, barrels of grain, jars of apple butter, everything organized, everything useful. Yet one shelf remained mostly empty. The baking shelf. Flour occupied part of it. Honey occupied another. Still, the space felt incomplete. The sight sparked an idea. Perhaps because of the weather. Perhaps because autumn encouraged certain cravings. Either way, the answer arrived immediately. Spiced buns. Warm, soft, sweet. The kind of treat designed specifically for rainy afternoons. The problem, of course, was spices. True cinnamon didn't exist in the pantry. However, Marta the baker had once traded him several pieces of aromatic bark remarkably similar to cinnamon. He retrieved one now. The moment it was crushed beneath a mortar and pestle, the kitchen transformed. Warm sweetness filled the air. Notes of wood, honey, autumn leaves. The fragrance seemed to wrap around the room like a blanket. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. The dough came together smoothly. Flour, meal, honey, butter, a touch of salt, simple ingredients, reliable ingredients. The dough felt soft beneath his hands, silky, elastic, alive. He kneaded patiently, the familiar rhythm calming his thoughts. Hush, fall, the, hush, fall, te. Rain continued outside. The fire crackled nearby. Time slowed, exactly as it should. Once the dough rested, Elias prepared the filling. Honey, butter, crushed spice bark, a little apple butter. The mixture became thick and fragrant, amber-colored, almost glowing beneath the kitchen light. The smell alone made him hungry. Soon, the dough was rolled flat, the filling spread evenly. Then everything was carefully rolled and sliced. Perfect spirals, rows of future buns, each one promising comfort. They rose beside the stove while the kitchen filled with warmth. When finally baked, the results exceeded expectations. The buns emerged golden brown, soft, glossy, beautiful. Steam escaped from the spiraled centers, honey caramelized slightly along the edges. The scent spread throughout the inn almost immediately. The effect was remarkable. Rowan returned from outside just as the first tray cooled. The shepherd stepped through the doorway, paused, sniffed the air, then looked directly toward the kitchen. No fair. Elias laughed. No fair. Nobody should be allowed to make something that smells that good. A reasonable complaint. The first bite silenced further objections. The bun practically melted apart. Soft layers, warm spice, rich honey, hints of apple, comfort in edible form. Even the shepherd looked briefly emotional, though he would probably deny it later. A notification appeared. New recipe learned. Autumn spice buns. Quality, excellent. Comfort value, very high. Potential signature item. Potential signature item. Elias nodded. That sounded about right. The afternoon passed pleasantly. Rain continued. Guests remained inside. The fireplace remained busy. The inn felt full despite hosting only 2 people and 1 dog. Sometimes atmosphere mattered more than numbers. At one point, Rowan unrolled a small collection of carved wooden animals from his pack. Sheep, dogs, birds. Tiny figures crafted during evenings spent traveling. The carvings were surprisingly good. Each carried its own personality, its own charm. Elias purchased a small sheep carving almost immediately, not because he needed it, because it belonged here. The little carving eventually found a place on the mantel above the fireplace. The first decoration with an actual story attached to it that felt important. As evening approached, the rain finally began to weaken. Clouds broke apart. Small patches of blue appeared overhead. The setting sun peeked through briefly. Golden light streamed across the valley. Every wet leaf reflected fire-like colors. The entire orchard glowed. Beautiful. Temporary. Perfect. Dinner was simple. Vegetable stew. Fresh bread. Warm spice buns for dessert. Nobody complained. Least of all Rowan. Later that evening, after the dishes had been cleaned and lanterns lit, the shepherd sat quietly beside the fire, watching the flames, holding a mug of tea. The dog snored gently nearby. Outside, the final raindrops fell from the roof. Then silence returned. Real silence. Comfortable silence. The kind Harold had spoken about weeks ago. Eventually Rowan smiled. You know. Elias looked up. This place keeps getting better. The compliment felt strangely significant, because Rowan had now experienced the inn in different weather, different days, different moods, and still felt the same way. The Firefly Lantern Inn wasn't improving by accident anymore. It was becoming something intentionally. A place people remembered. A place people returned to. A place where rain sounded softer. Where bread smelled warmer. Where autumn felt a little more beautiful. Later, after everyone had retired for the night, Elias stepped onto the porch. The clouds had finally cleared. Stars glittered overhead. The orchard shimmered beneath moonlight. The lanterns cast pools of golden light across the wooden boards. A final notification appeared. In milestone reached. Returning visitor probability increased. Current reputation. Well-liked local stop. Comfort rating. 42. Elias smiled. The numbers hardly mattered. Not really. Still, they were nice to see. He took one final sip of tea, looked out across the sleeping valley, then headed inside. Tomorrow would bring another day, another meal, another story, and somewhere in the kitchen, the scent of fresh spice buns still lingered softly in the warm autumn air. Arc 2, Chapter 8. The Market Wagon. The next morning arrived bright and clear. Not a single cloud remained from yesterday's rain. The valley sparkled beneath fresh sunlight. Every leaf in the orchard seemed freshly polished. Drops of water still clung to branches and grass, catching the morning light like tiny crystals. After 2 days of rain, the world felt renewed, clean, refreshed. Elias stepped onto the porch carrying a mug of tea. The cool autumn air brushed against his face. Below, the valley stretched peacefully toward the distant hills. Smoke rose lazily from chimneys far away. Birds darted between trees. The road gleamed faintly where yesterday's rain had darkened the earth. For several minutes, he simply stood there, watching, listening, enjoying. These quiet moments had become one of his favorite parts of innkeeping. Not the cooking, not the improvements, not even the guests. The pauses between everything else. The moments when the world seemed content simply to exist. Behind him, the front door opened. Rowan emerged. The shepherd carried his pack, his staff, and the expression of someone preparing to return to the road. Looks like today's the day. Elias nodded. The weather finally cooperated. It did. The shepherd glanced toward the orchard, toward the lanterns, toward the inn itself. A smile appeared. "I'll miss this place." The words felt genuine, not polite, not casual, genuine. That made them worth hearing. Breakfast followed shortly afterward. Fresh bread, butter, apple preserves, and several remaining spice buns from yesterday's batch. The buns disappeared quickly. Neither man appeared surprised. Even the sheepdog received a small piece, a reward for professional-level napping. After breakfast, Rowan prepared his flock. The sheep gathered surprisingly efficiently. Apparently years of practice produced impressive results. The dog became an entirely different creature once work began. Focused, professional. The lazy fireplace sleeper vanished completely. In its place stood a highly capable herding dog directing sheep traffic with military precision. Elias watched from the porch, fascinated. Within 20 minutes, the flock had organized itself. The road awaited. The journey continued. Before leaving, Rowan approached one final time, then reached into his pack. "What's this?" "A dish." He handed over a small wooden carving. Elias examined it carefully. A lantern and calves. Simple, beautiful. The craftsmanship was remarkable. Tiny details covered the surface. Even the handle had been carefully shaped. For several seconds, Elias simply stared. "It's amazing." Rowan shrugged. "Consider it. Thanks for the meals." The shepherd smiled. "And the peace." There, with one final wave, he joined the flock. The dog barked once. The sheep began moving, and slowly the little caravan disappeared down the valley road. The inn felt quieter afterward. Not empty, just quieter, like a room after good company has departed. Elias placed the lantern carving on the mantel beside the wooden sheep. The collection was growing. Small objects, small stories. Together, they made the inn feel more alive. A notification appeared. Guest memory item added. Carved lantern. Decor bonus 1. Atmosphere improved. Apparently the system appreciated decorations. Fair enough. The inn certainly did. The remainder of the morning passed peacefully. Elias cleaned the guest room, changed linens, polished tables, refilled flower arrangements. Routine work, comforting work, the sort of tasks that made an inn feel cared for. Around midday, however, something unusual appeared on the road. A wagon. Large, colourful, much larger than Harold's cart. The vehicle rolled steadily toward the inn. Its sides were painted bright blue and green. Decorative designs covered the wood, flowers, leaves, birds. The entire wagon looked cheerful, almost festive. Two sturdy horses pulled it forward. As it approached, Elias noticed something else. Goods. Lots of goods. Pretties. Boxes. Bundles. Barrels. A traveling merchant. Interesting. Very interesting. The wagon stopped near the porch. A cheerful woman climbed down immediately, perhaps in her late 40s. Bright eyes, bright scar, bright smile. Everything about her seemed energetic. Well now. She looked around enthusiastically. This wasn't here last year. Elias laughed. I've been hearing that a lot. The woman grinned. Good sign. She introduced herself as Beatrice, a merchant who traveled between villages, delivering goods before winter arrived. According to her, autumn was the busiest season of the year. Everyone needed supplies. Everyone wanted comforts. Everyone suddenly remembered things they should have purchased months earlier. The explanation sounded believable. Before long, Beatrice occupied a table inside. Tea appeared. Conversation followed. The merchant had stories. Hundreds of stories. Perhaps thousands. Roads. Villages. Festivals. Markets. Weather disasters. Goat-related incidents. An alarming number of goat-related incidents. Elias quickly concluded that traveling merchants lived extraordinarily interesting lives. Eventually, Beatrice opened several sample crites. The common hall transformed into a miniature market. Colorful plot. Handmade pottery. Candles. Spices. Kitchen tools. Dried fruits. Wooden decorations. The selection was impressive. The possibilities were dangerous. Very dangerous. Especially for someone who owned an inn. One particular crate immediately caught Elias's attention. Candles. Dozens of them. Honey candles. Apple-scented candles. Herbal candles. The gentle fragrances drifted into the air. Subtle. Comforting. Perfect for guest rooms. Another crate contained pottery. Beautiful pottery. Glazed mugs in warm autumn colors. Bowls decorated with leaf patterns. Serving dishes suitable for an inn. Elias found himself mentally redesigning half the common hall. The merchant noticed immediately. You have the look. The look of someone about to spend money. Elias laughed. Unfortunately, she wasn't wrong. After careful consideration and significant self-control, he purchased several items. A set of handmade mugs, a few decorative candles, and a woven table runner featuring autumn leaves. Nothing extravagant, just enough to add warmth, enough to improve the atmosphere. The effect became obvious almost immediately. The new mugs looked wonderful beside the fireplace. The candles added gentle fragrance. The table runner brightened the dining area. Small changes, meaningful changes, the best kind. A notification appeared. Interior upgrade. Seasonal decorations added. Atmosphere 2. Guest comfort increase. The system approved. So did Elias. Lunch naturally became an event. Guests and merchants had a way of encouraging better meals. Today's menu featured fresh bread, creamy vegetable soup, roasted carrots glazed with honey. Naturally, warm spice buns. The spice buns continued building their reputation. Beatrice consumed one, then another, then purchased 6 for the road. A strong endorsement. The afternoon slipped by in pleasant conversation. Travel stories. Trading stories. Inn stories. The common hall felt lively. Not crowded. Just alive. As sunlight gradually shifted toward evening, Beatrice finally prepared to leave. The wagon was repacked. Pretties secured. Horses fed and watered. Before climbing aboard, she paused, then looked toward the inn. You're building something good here. The statement surprised him. Perhaps because she had seen dozens, maybe hundreds, of inns throughout her travels. If anyone understood roadside hospitality, it would be a merchant. I hope so. Beatrice smiled. I know so. Then she climbed aboard. The wagon rolled forward, colorful wheels turning slowly beneath golden autumn sunlight. Soon it disappeared down the road, leaving the valley quiet once more. That evening, Elias lit the new candles inside the common hall. Soft fragrance drifted through the room. Apple, honey, autumn herbs. The atmosphere immediately felt richer, warmer, more welcoming. As darkness settled across the valley, he sat beside the fireplace with a cup of tea. The wooden sheep rested on the mantel. Beside it stood the carved lantern. The new mugs gleamed softly in the firelight. Outside, leaves drifted through the night air. Inside, the inn felt more like home than ever. And somewhere deep down, Elias realized something. The Firefly Lantern Inn wasn't merely being repaired anymore. It was developing character. One guess, one recipe, one story at a time. Arc 2, Chapter 9, The Recipe Book. The morning after Beatrice's visit arrived wrapped in golden sunlight. Autumn seemed determined to show off. The sky stretched overhead in a flawless shade of blue. The orchard glowed with copper and amber leaves. Even the distant hills appeared painted in warm colors. From the porch, the valley looked like something from a storybook. Elias stood quietly with his morning tea, watching mist slowly disappear beneath the rising sun. The inn behind him creaked softly. The familiar sounds of settling wood, the gentle crackle of the kitchen stove, the comfortable noises of a building waking up. Life had become pleasantly predictable. Not boring. Predictable. There was a difference. Back on Earth, predictability had often felt dull. Here, it felt like a luxury. A warm loaf of bread could be predictable. So could sunsets. Neither ever became less enjoyable. Eventually, he headed inside. Today's plans were simple. Bake bread. Rotate pantry stock. Check firewood supplies. Perhaps experiment with a new recipe. A perfectly respectable day. The kitchen greeted him with warmth and the lingering scent of yesterday's spice buns. The new mugs purchased from Beatrice sat neatly on a shelf. The honey candles remained unlit for now, though their faint fragrance still lingered. The common hall looked wonderful, cozy, inviting, lived in. Exactly the atmosphere he wanted. As he began preparing bread dough, something caught his attention. A small cabinet tucked into the far corner of the kitchen. He'd noticed it before, dozens of times, yet somehow never opened it. An odd realization. Curiosity immediately took hold. The dove could wait a moment. Probably. The cabinet door stuck slightly when opened. Its hinges complained. Dust puffed outward. Inside sat several old ledgers, a few faded papers, and one thick leather-bound book. Interesting. Very interesting. The book looked ancient. Its cover was worn smooth by years of handling. Corners softened with age. A simple symbol had been stamped into the leather. A lantern. Elias carefully lifted it. The weight surprised him. Heavy. Solid. Important. The sort of book people kept for generations. He carried it to the nearest table, opened the cover, and froze. Recipes. Hundreds of recipes. Handwritten. Page after page. Neat entries. Messy entries. Notes scribbled in margins. Tiny corrections. Little comments. The handwriting changed throughout the book. Different owners. Different innkeepers. Different years. The realization sent a strange warmth through his chest. This wasn't merely a cookbook. It was history. The history of the inn. One recipe at a time. He turned pages slowly. Apple tarts. Vegetable stews. Herbal teas. Festival breads. Winter soups. Preserved fruits. Roasted vegetables. Every page carried evidence of someone's life. Someone who had cooked in this very kitchen. Someone who had stood beside this very stove. Someone who had cared about this inn, just as he did now. The several minutes Elias simply read. The experience felt surprisingly emotional, like discovering letters from previous generations, like meeting ghosts through food. A notification appeared. Historic item discovered. The Firefly Lantern Recipe Ledger. Legacy bonus unlocked. New feature. Inherited recipes. Elias smiled. For once, even the system seemed appropriately respectful. One particular page caught his attention. The ink had faded slightly, the edges worn, clearly a frequently used recipe. The title read, Harvest Honey Cake. Simple, unassuming. Yet dozens of notes filled the margins. Excellent for autumn. Guests love this. Serve warm. Extra honey if apples are tart. Made for harvest festival. Interesting. Very interesting. The recipe immediately became today's project. Bread could wait. History demanded attention. The ingredients proved surprisingly straightforward. Flour, eggs, honey, milk, butter, apples, a touch of spice bar. Simple ingredients. Yet many wonderful recipes began that way. The process felt different from normal cooking. Not difficult, meaningful, as though he were following instructions left by an old friend. He measured carefully, mix slowly, paid attention. The batter came together beautifully, golden from the honey, fragrant from the spice. Thin slices of apple were arranged across the top before baking, like overlapping autumn leaves. The cake entered the oven, and the waiting began. Soon the kitchen filled with aroma, rich honey, warm apples, sweet spice. The scent drifted through the inn, then into the hallway, then upstairs. The entire building smelled incredible, better than incredible, familiar, somehow, as though the inn itself remembered the recipe, as though the walls had been waiting for it. When the cake finally emerged, it looked beautiful, deep golden brown. Slices lightly caramelized, honey glaze shimmering across the surface. Steam rose gently into the air. Elias waited for it to cool, for approximately 3 minutes, a personal record of restraint. The first bite was extraordinary. Soft, voice, rich with honey. The apples added brightness. The spice added warmth. Everything balanced perfectly. Comfort food elevated through experience, not complexity. Experience. Generations of experience. No wonder the recipe had survived. A notification appeared. Inherited recipe learned. Harvest honey cake. Quality. Exceptional. Legacy bonus applied. Guest appeal. Very high. He immediately wrote the recipe into a newer notebook, just in case. Some traditions deserved preservation. The rest of the afternoon became dedicated to exploring the ledger. Each page revealed another small piece of history. One innkeeper had apparently obsessed over soups. Another left detailed notes regarding berry preserves. One particularly enthusiastic owner documented 37 different bread variations. 37. Elias respected the dedication. The book transformed the day. The inn suddenly felt older, richer, more connected. He was no longer merely restoring a building. He was continuing a story that had begun long before his arrival. Outside, autumn sunlight gradually shifted toward evening. The orchard glowed beneath golden light. Leaves drifted lazily across the grass. The valley remained peaceful. As always, dinner remained simple. Fresh bread, vegetable stew, slices of harvest honey cake for dessert. The cake somehow tasted even better after resting several hours. The flavors deepened, mellow, became richer. Another sign of a good recipe. After cleaning the kitchen, Elias carried the ledger into the common hall. The fireplace crackled softly. Lantern light illuminated the pages. Outside, darkness settled across the valley. Inside, history waited between leather covers. He spent hours reading. Not because he needed to, because he wanted to. At one point, he discovered a note written beside an old soup recipe. The handwriting looked different from every other entry. The message read, "Good food fills the stomach. Warm food fills the heart. An inn needs both." The note wasn't signed, yet it lingered with him. Simple wisdom, the sort of wisdom earned through years, rather than books. Elias closed the ledger gently, then looked around the common hall. The lanterns, the fireplace, the decorations, the polished tables, the warm atmosphere. Perhaps the unknown innkeeper had been right. Food mattered, but comfort mattered too. The best inns offered both. A final notification appeared. Legacy progress increased. Firefly lantern in history. 12 recovered. New legacy recipes await discovery. Elias smiled, then placed the ledger carefully upon a shelf behind the counter. A place of honor. A place it deserved. Outside, autumn winds rustled softly through the orchard. Inside, the Firefly lantern inn felt warmer than ever. Not because of the fireplace, not because of the food, because for the first time, Elias felt connected not only to the inn's future, but to its past. Arc 2, Chapter 10, A Full House. The first sign that something unusual was about to happen arrived just after sunrise. It wasn't a system notification, nor was it some dramatic event. It was the bread. More specifically, the amount of bread Elias felt compelled to make. He couldn't explain why. Perhaps instinct, perhaps experience, perhaps the inn itself whispering through years of habit. Whatever the reason, he woke that morning with a strange certainty. Today required extra loaves. So before dawn fully brightened the valley, he was already in the kitchen. The stove radiated gentle warmth. Lantern light flickered across polished countertops. Outside, the orchard shimmered beneath silver morning mist. Inside, dough rested beneath linen cloths. 3 loaves became 4. 4 became 6. By the time the sun crested the hills, the kitchen smelled gloriously of fresh bread. Golden crusts cooled atop wooden racks. Steam drifted through the room. The scent spread naturally into the common hall. Comfort, in its purest form. A notification appeared. Innkeeper's intuition activated. You feel unusually productive today. Luck 1. Elias stared. That's a new one. The sister offered no further explanation. Naturally, after weeks of living with magical blue windows, he had learned that explanations were often optional. Breakfast came and went peacefully. Bread, apple butter, a slice of harvest honey cake. Then came the guests. The first arrived mid-morning. A traveling herbalist, a cheerful woman carrying baskets of dried flowers and medicinal plants. She requested tea and a warm place to rest for several hours. Nothing unusual. The second guest arrived less than an hour later. A fisherman from a nearby village. He needed lunch before continuing home. Still normal. Then a third visitor appeared. A woodworker transporting carved furniture, components. Then a fourth, a courier. Then 2 sisters traveling toward a harvest festival in a neighboring village. By noon, the common hall contained more people than Elias had ever hosted simultaneously. The room felt alive. Conversations overlapped. Teacups clinked gently. Firelight danced across walls. The scent of fresh bread floated through the air. For the first time since arriving in this world, the Firefly lantern inn felt busy, not chaotic, busy. There was a difference, and surprisingly, Elias enjoyed it very much. The inn seemed to enjoy it too. Sunlight streamed through windows. Guests exchanged stories. Laughter occasionally erupted from one table or another. The atmosphere carried a warmth beyond physical comfort, a feeling, a sense that people genuinely wanted to be here. Around lunchtime, the real challenge began. Food. Lots of food. A notification appeared. Temporary event. Full house. Current guests. 6. Guest satisfaction opportunity. Serve quality meal. Bonus reputation available. Right. Elias rolled up his sleeves. Time to work. The kitchen immediately became a whirlwind of organized activity. Not frantic, focused. Years of cooking videos from his previous life suddenly proved surprisingly useful. Soup simmered. Bread sliced. Vegetables roasted. Apples baked. The stove worked continuously. Steam filled the kitchen. The scent of herbs drifted through the air. Every surface seemed occupied. Yet somehow everything flowed. Carrots caramelized beautifully. Potatoes roasted until golden. Fresh herbs added brightness. The soup developed a rich aroma that spread through the entire inn. Meanwhile, several harvest honey cakes baked in succession. Because if one thing had become clear, people loved cake, especially autumn cake. The first meal service felt almost surreal. Guests filled every table. Bowls of steaming soup emerged from the kitchen. Fresh bread followed. Then roasted vegetables glazed lightly with honey. The reactions were immediate. Smiles, content sighs, empty plates, all encouraging signs. At one point, Elias overheard part of a conversation. "I wasn't planning to stop here." The fisherman nodded toward his meal. "I'm glad I did." His companion immediately agreed. That alone felt worth the effort. Hours passed quickly afterward. Tea refills, additional bread, extra slices of cake, more conversation. The inn seemed to hum with life. For perhaps the first time since his arrival, Elias stopped thinking about restoration, stopped thinking about improvements, stopped thinking about future plans. Instead, he simply operated the inn the way it was meant to operate. The realization struck unexpectedly. The Firefly Lantern Inn wasn't becoming an inn anymore. It already was one. The thought lingered. Comfortable, meaningful. As afternoon slowly shifted toward evening, another surprise arrived. Several guests requested rooms. Unfortunately, Elias possessed only one proper guest room, a limitation becoming increasingly obvious. The herbalist received the room. The others continued their journeys. Yet their disappointment revealed something important. Demand existed, more than he'd realized. A blue notification appeared. Capacity warning. Current lodging capacity. 1 room. Demand exceeds availability. Suggested future upgrade. Guest wing expansion. Now, that was interesting. Very interesting. The inn had finally reached a point where growth became necessary. Not because the system said so, because guests wanted it. The best reason possible. As evening approached, visitors gradually departed, one by one. The fisherman, the courier, the sisters, the woodworker, each left behind thanks, compliments, and promises to recommend the inn. The common hall slowly quieted, returning to its familiar rhythm. Yet something felt different. The silence no longer felt empty. It felt earned. The aftermath of a good day. The herbalist remained for dinner. A simple meal. Vegetable stew. Fresh bread. Harvest honey cake. The fireplace glowed warmly nearby. Outside, autumn darkness settled across the valley. The lanterns illuminated the porch. The orchard rustled softly in the evening breeze. Eventually the final dishes were washed. The final lantern adjusted. The final chair returned to its place. Only then did Elias finally sit, tea in hand, exhausted, satisfied, the good kind of tired, the kind earned through meaningful work. A large notification appeared, larger than usual, much larger. The blue window expanded before him. Arc 2 complete, preparing for autumn. Objectives achieved. Pantry restored. Orchard harvest completed. Seasonal recipes developed. Guest reputation increased. Legacy ledger recovered. Full house event completed. Firefly Lantern Inn. Cleanliness 63/100. Comfort 58/100. Reputation well-liked local stock. Preparedness excellent. Guests hosted 18. Signature recipes. Fresh country bread. Autumn apple hand pie. Orchard apple butter. Autumn spice buns. Harvest honey cake. Major upgrade unlocked. Guest wing expansion. Requirements met. Arc 3 available. The first winter guests. Elias stared at the notification. For a long moment, he simply sat there, watching the fire, listening to the quiet crackle of burning logs. The inn had come a long way. When he first arrived, the building had been abandoned, dust-covered, forgotten. Now, travelers sought it out. Guests returned. Recipes filled the kitchen. Stories filled the common hall. The Firefly Lantern Inn had become something real, something alive. Outside, the first truly cold wind of autumn swept across the valley. Leaves danced beneath lantern light. The orchard whispered softly in the darkness. Winter was coming. For the first time, Elias felt ready. He raised his mug toward the fireplace. A silent toast to the inn, to the guests, to the road ahead. Then he smiled. Arc 3 could wait until tomorrow, tonight. The Firefly Lantern Inn was full of warmth, and that was enough.